The night Daniel Carter destroyed his marriage, he didn't even dare to look his wife in the eye. Instead, he stood in the center of their living room holding divorce papers, while her best friend sat beside him on the couch. Emily Harper would remember that moment for the rest of her life, not because of the betrayal, but because of the silence. The kind of silence that comes when your entire life cracks open and something inside you decides not to scream. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Chicago. Emily had just come home from work, still wearing the navy blazer she'd bought 3 years ago when she first started her job as a financial analyst. She had stopped by Daniel's favorite restaurant on the way home and picked up dinner, lemon chicken and mashed potatoes. He loved that meal, or at least he used to. The apartment smelled warm and familiar when she opened the door. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong when the lights were on. 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table, and Daniel wasn't alone. Her best friend, Jessica Lane, sat on the couch beside him. Jessica had been Emily's closest friend since college, the woman who helped her pick out her wedding dress, the one who held her hand when Emily's mother died. And now she sat there in Emily's living room, wearing a silk dress and Daniel's favorite smile. Emily slowly placed the takeout bag on the kitchen counter. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel cleared his throat. "Emily, we need to talk." Those were the words every woman recognizes instantly, the kind that never leads to anything good. Emily walked into the living room and looked at both of them carefully. Jessica couldn't meet her eyes. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but not guilty, just impatient. That was the first thing Emily noticed. He looked like someone waiting to get a difficult conversation over with, or like she was an inconvenience, like she was the problem. He held up a stack of papers. "I think it's better if we end things now before this gets ugly." Emily blinked slowly. "End things?" Daniel slid the papers across the coffee table. "Divorce papers." Jessica shifted slightly beside him, but said nothing. Emily didn't pick up the papers yet. Instead, she looked at Daniel, then at Jessica. And suddenly, the entire situation became painfully clear. Not a suspicion, not a guess, a certainty. She let out a quiet breath. "How long?" Daniel frowned. "What?" Emily's voice remained calm. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" The question landed like a stone in the room. Jessica's face flushed. Daniel leaned back against the couch. "Does that really matter now?" That was the moment Emily understood something important. The man she married 3 years ago was gone. The man sitting in front of her now didn't care about her pain, didn't care about her dignity. He just wanted freedom, and apparently, Jessica. Jessica finally spoke. "Emily, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." Emily almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the exact line people always use when they betray you. "It never is," Emily said quietly. Daniel tapped the divorce papers impatiently. "Look, I'm trying to do this the mature way. No drama, no lawyers fighting for months. Just sign the papers and we can all move on." Emily looked at him again. There was something strange about how confident he sounded, like he expected her to cry, or scream, or beg him not to leave. Jessica clearly expected the same thing. Her hands were clasped nervously in her lap, waiting, bracing for the explosion. But Emily didn't explode. She simply sat down in the chair across from them. Calm, composed, too calm. And that made Daniel uncomfortable. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. Emily finally picked up the divorce papers. She scanned the first page slowly. Daniel had clearly prepared everything carefully. Property division, the bank accounts, assets, and of course, the apartment, He was taking it. Of course he was. After all, Daniel always believed he was the successful one in the marriage, the rising star, the man with the bright future. Emily was just the supportive wife, the quiet woman who cooked dinner and stayed out of the spotlight. At least that's what he thought. Emily placed the papers back down. I see. Daniel leaned forward. So you'll sign? Jessica watched her carefully. Waiting. Emily folded her hands together calmly. If that's what you want, then yes. Daniel blinked. He clearly hadn't expected the answer to come so easily. Wait, seriously? Emily nodded. I don't believe in forcing someone to stay where they don't want to be. Jessica looked almost relieved. Daniel let out a small laugh. Well, that was easier than I thought. Emily stood up. I'll have the papers signed tomorrow. Then she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Daniel frowned. Where are you going? Emily paused briefly. Without turning around, she said quietly, to start over. And then she walked out into the rain. Neither Daniel nor Jessica noticed the small smile that appeared on Emily's face the moment the elevator doors closed. It wasn't the smile of a broken woman. It was the smile of someone who had just made a decision. A very important one. Because Daniel Carter believed he had just removed Emily Harper from his life. When what he didn't know was that in 6 months, he would be standing in a corporate office tower, nervously adjusting his tie, while the entire company waited for their new CEO to walk into the room. And the woman stepping through those doors, it would be the same wife he had just thrown away. 6 months later, Daniel Carter was having the worst morning of his career. He stood in the elevator of a 32-story glass tower in downtown Chicago, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. And the mirror on the elevator wall reflected a man who looked successful. Sharp navy suit, polished shoes, expensive watch. But the confidence behind his smile was gone. Because the company he worked for, Hallberg Financial Group, was collapsing. Not publicly, not yet. But inside the building, everyone knew. Stocks were dropping. Investors were pulling money out. And rumors had been spreading all week. The board had fired the previous CEO. And today, a new one was arriving. Daniel checked his phone again. No updates, no announcements, just messages from co-workers asking the same question. Who is the new CEO? The elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped into the lobby where dozens of employees were already gathered in small groups, whispering nervously. Across the room, Jessica Lane stood near the reception desk, scrolling through her phone. Jessica had moved in with Daniel 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. What started as excitement had quickly turned into something else. Pressure. Jessica worked in the marketing department at Hallberg Financial, and if the company collapsed, both of their careers would go down with it. She looked up when she saw him. You hear anything? She asked. Daniel shook his head. No one knows who the board hired. Jessica crossed her arms. Great, that's reassuring. Daniel tried to sound confident. It's probably some old finance dinosaur. But inside, he was nervous, and the last CEO had personally promoted Daniel to senior strategy manager. If the new CEO decided to restructure leadership, Daniel's job could disappear overnight. Jessica lowered her voice. I heard something else. Daniel frowned. What? The new CEO is young. Daniel laughed. That's impossible. Investors wouldn't trust someone young to run this company. Jessica shrugged. That's just what people are saying. Before Daniel could respond, a voice echoed across the lobby. Everyone to the conference hall, please. Employees slowly began moving toward the large presentation room on the 2nd floor. Daniel and Jessica walked together with the crowd. The tension in the air felt thick. Inside the conference hall, over 200 employees filled the seats. Executives sat in the front rows. Managers like Daniel filled the middle. Junior employees stood along the walls. At the front of the room stood Richard Hallberg, the founder of the company. He was a billionaire in his late 60s who rarely appeared in the office anymore. When he did, something serious was happening. Daniel leaned toward Jessica. "This must be bad." Jessica nodded nervously. Richard Hallberg stepped toward the microphone. The room fell silent. "I know the last few months have been difficult for everyone." He paused. "But Hallberg Financial was built on resilience, and today we begin a new chapter." Daniel folded his arms, waiting. The old man smiled slightly. "Our new CEO has already been working closely with the board behind the scenes." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Jessica whispered, "Behind the scenes?" Richard continued, "She is someone with extraordinary financial vision, someone who predicted the market shift that caught many companies off guard." Daniel frowned slightly. "She?" The room quieted again. "And starting today, she will lead Hallberg Financial into the future." Daniel glanced at Jessica. Neither of them recognized the name that was about to be spoken. Richard turned toward the entrance doors. "Please welcome your new CEO." The doors opened. Footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. At first, Daniel couldn't see the woman clearly. She walked confidently toward the stage in a tailored charcoal suit. Her posture is calm, controlled, professional. Employees leaned forward in their seats. Then she stepped into the light, and Daniel's entire body froze. But because the woman walking toward the stage was Emily Harper, his ex-wife. Jessica gasped beside him. "No way!" Daniel felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. Emily looked completely different. Her hair was shorter now. Her posture is stronger. Her expression was calm and confident. Nothing like the quiet woman who used to cook dinner in their apartment. Richard Hallberg shook her hand and stepped aside. The room erupted into polite applause. Daniel couldn't clap. He couldn't even breathe properly. Because Emily's eyes slowly scanned the room, row by row, until they stopped directly on him. For a brief moment, the world felt silent. Daniel expected anger, or bitterness, or some sign of resentment. But Emily only gave him a small, professional nod, like he was just another employee. Then she stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice was calm, steady, confident. Daniel had never heard her sound like that before. And I know many of you are wondering how we move forward from here. She paused briefly. Hallberg Financial is facing challenges, but I believe those challenges also bring opportunity. Employees listened carefully. Some looked impressed, some looked curious. Daniel felt something else. Fear, because the woman speaking on stage, she was no longer the wife he once controlled. This Emily looked powerful, decisive, dangerous. Emily continued her speech. "Boys, we will be restructuring several departments in the coming weeks." Daniel's stomach tightened. Jessica whispered nervously. "Restructuring?" Emily glanced down at the tablet in her hand. "Unfortunately, some leadership positions will need to be reviewed." Daniel's heart began pounding. Emily looked up again, and her eyes landed on him once more, just for a second. Then she said calmly, "Performance matters." Daniel felt cold, because suddenly he understood something. Like the woman he had once betrayed. She was now the most powerful person in the entire building, and she had complete control over his future. Daniel Carter had once asked Emily Harper to quietly disappear from his life. Now, she owned the room he was sitting in, and this time, she was the one holding the power. The moment the meeting ended, the entire room exploded with whispers. Employees stood up from their seats, stunned, confused, and excited. Some were impressed by the new CEO. Others were already pulling out their phones, sending messages. But Daniel Carter sat frozen in his chair. His brain refused to accept what he had just seen. Emily Harper, his ex-wife, the quiet woman he had divorced 6 months ago, was now the CEO of Hallberg Financial. Jessica grabbed his arm. "Daniel, say something." Her voice trembled. Daniel slowly stood up. "This has to be a mistake." Jessica looked terrified. "You were married to her for 3 years and you didn't know she was connected to the board?" Daniel's mind raced. Emily had always been private about work. He knew she worked in finance, but she never talked about details, never bragged, never showed ambition. He thought she was just ordinary. But clearly, he had been wrong. Very wrong. Across the room, Aunt Emily was surrounded by executives shaking her hand. She handled the attention calmly, thanking people politely. But behind her composed expression, she was watching the room carefully. And she noticed everything. The nervous glances, the sudden silence when certain employees looked at her, and especially the way Daniel and Jessica hurried out of the conference hall. Emily turned to Richard Hallberg. "Phase 1 begins today." The old billionaire smiled faintly. "Well, I knew you were the right choice." Emily simply nodded. Because this wasn't just about becoming CEO. There was another reason she accepted the job. A reason Daniel Carter had no idea about. Yet. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat at his desk staring at his computer screen. He hadn't done a single piece of work all day. Jessica stormed into his office and slammed the door behind her. "Do you know what people are saying right now?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "Jessica, not now." "No, I'd right now," she snapped. "They're saying you divorced the CEO." Daniel looked up sharply. Jessica paced across the room. "This is humiliating." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She didn't tell me who she was." Jessica laughed bitterly. "You think that matters now?" She leaned toward him. "If she wants revenge, Daniel, we're finished." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest. "Emily isn't like that." Jessica stared at him like he was insane. "You cheated on her with her best friend." Daniel didn't respond. Jessica lowered her voice. "She could destroy us." Before Daniel could answer, a notification appeared on his computer screen. Mandatory executive meeting, 3 p.m. location, CEO boardroom. Jessica noticed it too. Her face went pale. That can't be good. The boardroom was silent when Daniel walked in. 10 executives sat around the large glass table. Jessica sat near the end, nervously tapping her pen. At the head of the table, Emily sat calmly reviewing documents on her tablet, where Daniel felt something twist in his chest. She looked completely different in this setting. Confident, powerful, untouchable. The door closed behind him. Emily didn't look up right away. When she finally did, her expression was perfectly professional. "Mr. Carter, please take a seat." The formal tone made Daniel feel strangely uncomfortable, like they were strangers. He sat down slowly. Emily tapped the screen on the tablet. The large monitor on the wall lit up. A financial chart appeared. It read numbers, declining profit margins. Emily began speaking. "Over the past year, Hallberg Financial has lost nearly $40 million. Murmurs filled the room. Executives looked shocked. Emily continued calmly. Our internal audit team has discovered several irregularities. Daniel felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Emily turned the page on the screen. Transaction records appeared. Large sums of money are moving through various accounts, and the losses appear connected to several strategic investments made by the senior strategy department. Daniel's department. Jessica looked at him nervously. Emily finally turned her gaze directly toward Daniel. Mr. Carter, these investments were approved under your authority. Daniel felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward him. His throat tightened. The market shifted unexpectedly, he said quickly. Emily nodded slowly. Yes. Then she pressed another button. A new set of documents appeared. Contracts, private bank transfers, offshore accounts. Jessica's eyes widened. Emily's voice remained calm. But our investigation also discovered something else. Daniel's heart pounded. Emily looked directly at him. These investments were routed through shell companies. The room fell silent. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't know anything about that. Emily held his gaze for several seconds. Then she spoke the words that made his blood run cold. That's interesting. She slid a printed document across the table toward him. Because the accounts are registered under your name. Jessica gasped. Daniel stared at the paper. His signature, his authorization code, his ID, everything pointed directly at him. This isn't possible. Emily leaned back slightly. Her expression was calm, almost sympathetic. Daniel Carter, you are currently the primary suspect in a $40 million financial fraud investigation. The entire boardroom froze. Jessica looked like she might faint. Daniel felt the room spinning. This is insane, he shouted. I didn't steal anything. Emily's eyes remained steady. Then you'll have the opportunity to explain everything. She paused, and then added quietly, because the legal department has already contacted the authorities. The boardroom doors suddenly opened. Two men in dark suits stepped inside. Corporate investigators. Daniel's stomach dropped. Emily closed the file on her tablet. Mr. Carter? Her voice was calm, controlled, professional. You're suspended from your position effective immediately. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. The woman he once betrayed was now sitting across the table as the person deciding his fate. And for the first time since the divorce, Emily's eyes showed something different. Not anger, not revenge. Justice. But Daniel Carter had believed Emily Harper would disappear quietly after the divorce. Instead, she had become the one person powerful enough to destroy his entire world. And the investigation had only just begun. The silence in the boardroom felt suffocating. Daniel Carter stared at the document in his hands, as if the words might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. But they didn't. The evidence looked undeniable. His name, his authorization, his department. $40 million. Fraud. Jessica sat frozen beside him, her face pale. The two investigators remained near the door, watching quietly. Daniel's voice cracked. This is wrong. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She simply folded her hands calmly on the table. Then explain it. Daniel looked at her desperately. I didn't move that money. Emily held his gaze. I believe you. The words shocked everyone in the room. Jessica looked up sharply. Daniel blinked. You... what? Emily leaned slightly forward. Daniel, you're arrogant. The bluntness made several executives shift in their chairs. But you're not stupid, she continued calmly. You would never create a fraud trail this obvious. Daniel's confusion deepened. Then why does everything point to me? Emily tapped the tablet again. The screen changed. Another set of financial records appeared. But these were different. Smaller transactions, different access times, different locations. Aunt Emily turned her eyes toward Jessica. Jessica's breathing became shallow. "Jessica Lane," Emily said quietly. Jessica forced a laugh. "What does this have to do with me?" Emily zoomed in on the data. "These transfers were made using Daniel's authorization codes." She paused. "But the login location came from a different computer." Jessica's fingers trembled. Emily continued calmly. "A marketing department workstation?" The room slowly turned toward Jessica. Jessica shook her head quickly. "Or that proves nothing." Emily tapped the screen again. Security footage appeared. A video from inside the office late at night. The camera showed someone sitting at Daniel's computer, accessing financial files, entering authorization codes. The woman in the footage slowly turned toward the screen. "Jessica." A shocked murmur spread through the boardroom. Daniel felt like someone had punched him in the chest. He stared at Jessica in disbelief. "You." Jessica's composure finally cracked. "What you don't understand!" she shouted. Emily remained calm. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Jessica stood abruptly. "You were never supposed to find out." Daniel felt his heart pounding. "What did you do?" Jessica's eyes filled with angry tears. "I fixed things." The room fell silent. Jessica pointed at Emily. "She had everything, Daniel." Her voice trembled with rage. Her career, her connections, her perfect reputation. Daniel felt sick. Jessica continued. "Sure, and you were stuck being her shadow," Daniel whispered hoarsely. "So you stole $40 million and framed me?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "It wasn't supposed to be this messy." Emily spoke quietly. "You planned to disappear." Jessica looked at her. Emily nodded toward the records. Offshore accounts, fake identities, the whole thing was carefully designed. Jessica's silence confirmed everything. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his entire world collapsing around him. "When you destroyed my life." Jessica shook her head. "No, Daniel. You destroyed your own life the day you cheated." The investigator stepped forward. "Jessica Lane, you'll need to come with us." Jessica didn't resist. As they led her towards the door, she looked back once more. Not at Emily, at Daniel. "You were never worth this anyway." Then she disappeared down the hallway. The door closed, and the boardroom fell completely silent. Daniel sat there for several seconds, unable to move, like the woman he left his wife for had just destroyed everything. Emily finally stood up. The executive slowly left the room, giving them space. Soon it was just the two of them. For the first time in months, Daniel and Emily stood alone in the same room. Daniel spoke quietly. "You knew?" Emily nodded. "I suspected." "When?" "The week before the divorce." Daniel frowned. "But you said nothing." Emily met his eyes. "Would you have believed me?" Daniel looked away. He knew the answer. "No." Emily walked slowly toward the window overlooking the city skyline. "Jessica accessed your files after hours many times." She continued calmly. "When the fraud began appearing, I started investigating quietly." Daniel's voice felt hollow. "And the divorce?" Emily turned toward him. "That was your decision." Daniel lowered his head. Regret washed over him like a wave. "I ruined everything." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she walked toward the door. Daniel looked up quickly. "And what happens to me now?" Emily paused. Her voice remained calm. "You're not being charged." Daniel blinked. "What?" "The investigators confirmed you weren't involved." Relief flooded through him, but it lasted only a moment. Emily added one final sentence. "You're still fired." Daniel felt the weight of the words sink in. Of course he was. He had lost his job, his reputation, his marriage. Emily opened the door. Then she stopped. Without turning around, she spoke one last time. "Ciao, Daniel." He looked up. "I did love you once." The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. "But the moment you chose betrayal?" She paused. "You chose the ending too." Emily stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind her. And Daniel Carter finally understood something too late. The quiet woman he thought he could discard had become the strongest person he had ever known. And this time, she walked away for good.